So it's my great pleasure to introduce the next speaker. I think it's really, really important for any business, and most of you are in business in one way or another, to have a view from outside. And it sometimes isn't great to have a view from so completely outside that the person speaking doesn't understand anything at all about your business, which is why I think John Hegarty is absolutely perfect to give this talk, and we're very, very lucky to have him giving up his weekend to come here, going through the hell of trying to fly from Gatwick to here. I think they got in at something like 2 o'clock this morning with Tim from via Toulouse. Most of you will know perfectly well who John Hegarty is. For those of you who are completely pure and know nothing whatsoever about the world of advertising, when I mentioned to a friend in advertising that I was writing about him, he kind of went weak at the knees and said, but he's an icon. He's my hero. He has... I'm not going to give the ad speak intro because I'm not from that world, but after a sort of glorious early career, he created Bartle Bogle Hegarty, which is so famous that it's lampooned by Private Eye regularly, which is a great honour. Has been responsible for masses of campaigns that you will know awfully well. If I dredge back in my mind, Levi's, was it? Levi's in the laundry, the hunk. Vorsprung durch Technik, and lots more regular and recent ones that I can't remember. But very, very brilliant. Poor thing at the moment is responsible for inter many alia advertising British Airways. It's an agency which goes for quality rather than quantity, but even so, they have offices, obviously in London, in New York. In fact, a beautiful fit with this morning, Sao Paulo, Shanghai, Mumbai, and Singapore. And who knows, maybe Moscow soon. But what gives John a little bit of inside track on the world of wine, and I think just the right amount, is that a few years ago, he and his partner Philippa Crane went mad and decided to buy a very beautiful domain in the Languedoc, Domaine des Chamans Hegarty. You put the Hegarty on, yes, Chamans. And with their manager, winemaker, Samuel, are doing great guns there. So he's been exposed to a bit of wine, but doesn't come from wine. And we're very, very lucky that he, I know, has put a lot of effort and energy into what he's going to tell us. I haven't a clue what he is going to say, but I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope you enjoy it.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that fantastic introduction. I just about recognized it, actually. Actually, one of the disadvantages of getting up and talking after lunch is I think I'm the only one in the room who hasn't been drinking. So you'll either be very receptive to this or you'll be booing in no time at all. I'm going to start here, and I've titled my talk, well, the brief was the wine industry from the outside, and I've added, or lose the mystery and keep the magic. And hopefully I'm going to say things that provoke, hopefully I'm going to say things that not everybody's going to agree with, and that's the point of this talk of mine, is to start a debate, is to perhaps challenge certain things and open us up to possible change. But as obviously the brief from the symposium was to view the industry from the outside, I thought I'd remind all of us what is actually happening in that part of the world. And there have been a number of forces at work that have fundamentally changed the way we now view consumers. And actually, this is my first point. is that we should stop talking about these people as consumers and consider them as an audience. Now, I will actually come back to that point later in my talk. But from now on, I will refer to the people who buy wine not as consumers, but as an audience. And the two driving forces that have dramatically changed virtually all markets are globalization and digital technology. Now, these two forces, both linked, have had a profound effect on how we actually view markets and actually how they now actually operate. It's also fair to say that the world we're now looking at is more transparent, more open, more demanding, and is both, and this is an important point to understand, is both more and less accessible. It's less accessible because it's so easy to switch you off, and more accessible if you get the message right and engage your audience in a stimulating and an interesting way. And almost we're seeing a polarization here going on where, people who get it wrong get it seriously wrong. People who get it right get it seriously right. There is a polarization going on. And one of the other things that we talk about very much at BBH is we talk about the walls have come down. Information, knowledge, and power now increasingly reside in the hands of your audience. Now, what used to be the preserve of large organizations has now been democratized. And again, I don't want to unnecessarily overstate this point, but one could argue power has always resided in the hands of the consuming public. It was actually, in a way, it was their money in their pockets that we were always, all of us in some way or another, trying to prize from them. And in fact, which always makes me laugh, this one, the consumer is king, phrase that I constantly hear people saying now to me, and they come into BBH and manufacturers talk about the consumer is king, John, you've got to remember that. I do remind them actually that the consumer is king as a phrase was first coined in 1910. Nothing is new, you could argue. So today's talk of consumer power isn't as new as some people would have you believe. And if you doubt that, I would suggest you talk to anybody in the retail trade, which I'm sure many of you have to do. It can be a very distressing process. But increasingly, that power, this power of access, is being aligned with the power of knowledge. And access, obviously, to information that enhances that knowledge. So we're looking at the growth of knowledge. Media, don't need me to tell you, has gone global, which has allowed brands, in a way, to do the same. Information is now so easily accessible that influence is being democratized. Markets and brands now cross borders, increasing competition, innovation, and opportunity, exposing the public to ideas, products, and tastes as never before. And this very symposium is an example of that. This has raised expectations and it's raised competition. And, sadly for many people, it's forced price contraction across virtually every industry. This, in a way, I would argue, is the most scary and the most exciting time to be in any, and I will use the word consumer here, related industry. I mean, in a way, technology has always liberated thinking and knowledge. But today, it's taking the agenda from large corporations, big structures, big involved corporations, and placing it in the hands of the people. Until recently, markets were dominated, really, by wealthy corporations who could afford access to the media. It was very expensive, buying advertising, very expensive. Controlling PR, very expensive. The cost of entry to these markets was prohibitive, and it meant control rested with powerful institutions. Obviously, as I've just said, backed by large wallets. Well, that has now been broken down and is being broken down. Communication is no longer a rich man's club. It's now available to the innovative, the inventive, and the daring. And that's important to remember. The innovative, the inventive, and the daring. One could actually argue, this is a point that we constantly make at BBH, that actually large organizations are now at a disadvantage. Being, after all, responsive and open aren't exactly their strong points. Anybody who's witnessed BP would probably agree with that. But now let me show you two of the changes. And here's actually how conventionally how branded influence occurred. Now this is the conventional, the old world. And it sort of occurred like this. So you started with opinion formers. Opinion formers grew to early adopters, and then it became a mass market product. That's how influence was actually passed down a formal chain. Well, that now has changed. And it works like this. As mass markets have been democratized by technology, and influence has been opened up. So the street has become as influential as the influencers. So it's not just top down, but it's also bottom up. Very important point. So if we think, say, for instance, about a fashion brand, they look up as well as down. And I don't know, I suppose many of you know Zara, the Spanish fashion brand, that's actually been hugely, hugely successful. Obviously, they look to fashion shows for their inspiration, but they also look to the street for inspiration. If you want to be a cool brand today, you can, of course, if you're in the fashion world, go to the fashion shows, but also you go style hunting in the streets of the cities that are at the cutting edge of change. There is also actually another phenomena that is occurring, and it's called don't get caught in the middle ground, or perhaps how we value premium and value. And again, here's a kind of conventional view of a market. That was it, luxury, then you can break it down in more detail if you wanted, but essentially that's it. Luxury, premium, then became middle market, then it became a value market. Whatever you're selling, it actually looked at this consumer pyramid, and you mapped where your product sat in the market. The only problem now is the pyramid has moved apart. And there is increasingly no middle ground. Innovation and style accelerate the separation in any given market. So for instance, those of you who know this product, Mr. Dyson invents the bagless vacuum cleaner. He styles it in a way that dramatizes the innovation and charges €100 more than his competitors. The market then splits between the latest highly innovative product offering and the acceptable brand value brands at the bottom. Actually, what's happening, of course, is the middle is falling out of the market. So don't be caught in the middle. And I think actually, I will have to mention this as we've talked about airlines and the problems we've had. If you look at the airline industry, that's a very good example where you're seeing the development of very, very top-end brands coming out of the Middle East, are doing an incredible job, and you're looking at value brands at the very bottom, the Ryanairs and those markets. And if you're caught in the middle of that, you're in a very, very difficult place. Now, because life isn't simple, you have a number of paradoxes. Power has definitely shifted to your audience, but there are also in danger of being confused. Now, surely at the click of a button, they're in control. Yes, that is true. But there's so much choice. Even with all this knowledge, they're still often bewildered. Alvin Toffler, in his seminal book, written now some 30 years ago, called Future Shock, predicted that the profligation of choice was becoming bewildering and confusing for consumers. This would eventually lead to isolation and force consumers to reject markets. This at the time was not an unreasonable theory. And in fact, people still talk about there's a paralysis of choice. And today, 25 or 30 years after this prediction, people still refer to this point. And that's understandable, the paralysis of choice. And just as a little humorous aside, this one always makes me smile, and I came across it the other day. So you've decided to paint your apartment white. You know, you think to yourself, well, there's nothing complicated about that, you might say. Oh, yes, there is. And here's a paint chart that you would look at if you wanted to paint your apartment white. And that is a Dulux paint chart. Brilliant. Now, which white would you go for? You know, how do I get advice? Who knows? Have I chosen the wrong white? You know. But of course, what Toffler hadn't predicted was the fragmenting of audiences and their desires, and how that would actually drive choice, and the invention, obviously, he didn't predict, of the internet. The internet, as I've said, has altered the balance of power and tilted it in favor of the public. Toffler also constantly referred to people as consumers. So I'm going back to my original point about consumers and audiences. If instead you refer to the public who purchase your product as an audience, you begin to alter the rules of engagement. Because audiences seek to be entertained. They interact, they enthuse, and develop a commitment to that which is engaging. The term consumer implies a top-down, subservient relationship, one which is controlled by the manufacturer. This relationship lacks energy, ambition, and trust. It's a relationship of the past, we would argue, not the future. And in this new landscape, trust becomes ever more important. And this is why brands are so important, and why we've seen the explosion of brands. Now, I do know the word brand in the wine world is close to blasphemy, and a bolt will probably come out of the sky and strike me dead for actually uttering this word. But this is, I would argue, completely misguided. Brands, if I could just explain, and maybe you all know this, but it's worth reminding ourselves. Brands only came into existence because as a society became more mobile, we could no longer buy things from our neighbours, our food, our clothes, our implements, whatever. We started buying from strangers. So the question was, how could we trust those strangers to sell us well-made, reliable, safe products? And how could we trust these products to do what the manufacturers claimed, the producers claimed? We created brands. The function of those brands was to instill trust into the goods they were selling. And because of that, we were prepared to pay a premium for those brands. Now, it really is as simple as that. And then, of course, as we progressed, these brands not only represented trust, they also became badges of acceptability and outward signs of achievement and status. Now, one of the best modern definitions of a brand that I know is this one. We'll remove the Dulux chart because you're completely confused now. And it says, a brand is the most valuable real estate in the world, a corner of somebody's mind. I think that's the brilliant definition of what a brand is. But of course, some people are still suspicious of this word, this terrible, terrifying word that we must all run away from. So let me try and assuage that. If I change the word brand and insert the word reputation, perhaps it might be more acceptable. And the question there is, who would not want a good reputation? One that people looked up to, that people talk about, trust, and look forward to. I'm not sure they wouldn't. And there is something else a brand offers in this new, complex, multi-choice world. And this, again, another important point. It shorthands the decision-making process. And in a world of oversupply, a paralysis of choice, that is essential. And we call it the power of fame. But fame not only aids the decision-making process in a time-starved world, it helps resist competitive pressure. It adds value to a product, and it helps premium pricing. And before you reject this point, make sure you don't get celebrity and fame confused. The dictionary defines it as such. It defines it as such. This is you always fear this moment, don't you? We'll just press that again and see what happens. There it is. Look at that. The dictionary defines fame as public renown, great esteem. Now, I think in the world of wine, this point is well understood, and it's quite right that we're saying this here in Bordeaux by the Grand Cru. Their ability to charge eye-watering prices for their products relies on their fame, which is, of course, created by rarity, quality, and, in their case, history. And that's fine for owners of the Grand Cru. They've had 100 years or so to establish their reputations. The question for everyone else is, how can you shortcut that 100 years or so of history? Now, it's at this moment we should now apply all this thinking, I think, to the world of wine. And I'm going to make some observations as an outsider, because that was my brief. The wine industry is almost certainly, you've obviously heard this before, the most fragmented market I've ever experienced. It's fragmented, it's confusing, and it's impenetrable. In other markets, of course, be it cars, fashion, food, whatever, you might have a dozen or so competitors. Levi's, for instance, one of the fashion brands that I've worked on, as Jancis referred to, they have about 8 main competitors. Audi, another brand that I work on, has about 6. And actually, there's a great similarity between all these brands, despite what everybody says. Selling cars, clothes, soap, soup, chocolate are amazingly actually similar. But in the wine industry, you don't need me to tell this to you, it is almost limitless. I think actually I'm right in saying, but it doesn't really matter, I think there are something like 50,000 vineyards here in France. I know they're shrinking, but something like that. All potentially competitors, and of course that's just France. So to characterize the wine industry as fragmented would be something of an understatement. Now you might ask, well, does that matter? So what? You could argue that it's giving the wine drinker a fantastic choice. Well, it actually does, and that's been fantastic. You'd be right to say that's part of wine's success, is actually its diversity. But there is a saying in business that complexity destroys profitability. And in this market, it does more than that. It is actually in danger of hindering adoption. Now, let's go back a bit and just think about this for a moment. Markets expand because the product being sold meets with public approval and is readily accessible. But if a product isn't easily understood and accessible, it takes power from the producer and it hands it to the retailer. The retailer then simplifies the purchasing decision and then becomes the trusted partner, who then owns the relationship and dictates terms to the producer. There's no question wine meets with public approval, but it fails hopelessly on accessibility, therefore limiting growth. And never underestimate the public's lack of knowledge and their inability to acquire it. And we've always said, looking foolish is not much of a selling proposition. And let's face it, we've all experienced that restaurant moment, haven't we, when the wine list is passed around the diners like some hot potato until it gets to someone who knows a little bit about wine. And that's probably someone in this room, and it's your choice. Why is that? It is fear. And we as an industry, you as an industry, have encouraged that fear. I remember actually in the late 70s working to try and help promote in the UK fresh coffee versus instant coffee. And it stuck in my mind, and it stuck with me forever. And I couldn't believe when we did all the research amongst people who were going to serve coffee, it was housewives, men, whoever it was, the fear in getting it wrong was palpable. I mean, it was bizarre. You felt like saying, it's only a cup of fucking coffee, just put some hot water in and, you know. People were in absolute fear. And it wasn't until this machine occurred, now this is actually a modern version of this machine, that actually sales of fresh coffee in the late 70s, early 80s in the UK took off. It took the fear away. You measure the coffee in, poured hot water in the other bit, you pressed the button, hey presto, it was done. Yet, I would argue, this is a market that almost goes out of its way to confuse the consumer. This, of course, is most true of the old world rather than the new. In fact, one could argue part of the success of the New World wine has been not just in its quality, but it's in its accessibility. It has, to a certain extent, democratized the appeal of wine. It is now, when I talk about my point, which is lose the mystery, let's keep the magic. And when I recently suggested to a wine buyer that wine labels from the old world were confusing and needed to be simplified, didn't give anybody information that was of any use to them whatsoever, he reacted with old world disdain, that we needed to keep the mystery. Mystery was important. I replied, far from it. Mystery kept people at arm's length and reduced the chances of inclusion. I then suggested that you enhance the magic and that actually we should lose the mystery. And I think, my belief, this is an industry that has totally confused mystery and magic, thinking they are one and the same thing. They are not. Now, we all understand the magic of wine, a product that makes an ordinary meal an occasion, that enlightens conversation, friendship and gatherings, a process that turns fruit into a liquid, that engages, enhances and celebrates our ingenuity and is a gift from nature. It transforms our landscapes and civilizes us as almost no other product does. Wine's success as a product category is actually unquestionable. The desire to understand and experiment, you could argue, is almost limitless. If you go on to Amazon, look at the number of books on wine that you can purchase. But I believe this is a reactive process, not the wine industry being proactive, and is actually limited to an elite group of purchasers. The majority of wine drinkers, I would argue, feel excluded from the higher echelons of the market. And as I keep saying, access is key to expanding a market. But the question for the wine industry is, how should it demystify the purchasing decision and aid understanding? Well, it's a very obvious statement to make, but a label is your first introduction to a product, is a vital step in adoption. And I'm not just talking about attractiveness here. I'm really talking about information as well. Although, of course, it's always important to remember all information goes in through the heart. That is important to understand. We respond to information on an emotional level. But information is key to opening up a market and achieving trial. You should ask, does your label include information that genuinely aids consumer knowledge? Grape variety. Is it hand-picked? Was it naturally irrigated? Is it organic? Is it biodynamic? What food do I match it with? And when should it be best drunk by? Do I find any of that information on wine? Mostly not. Yet consumers would say to you, please give me that information. It aids my decision-making process. Product labels are gateways to knowledge, trial, and experimentation. But of course, 99% of the vineyards don't have vast resources at their disposal for communication. And this is where I believe technology is going to come to your aid. Social networking, blogging, tweeting, all of these have opened up the opportunity of turning occasional trialists into committed evangelists. But only if you have something interesting to say. And please, if I hear one more person say, I am passionate about wine, that's why I make it, I think I'll throw up. All right? No more of that. We all know you're passionate about wine. How are you different about it? Tweeting, blogging, and Facebooking are all fabulous, but only if you're engaging your audience in an interesting and stimulating way. So, now, where does all this leave us? Now, I can feel from the audience here completely confused. So, let me just recap. You're in a fragmented market. You have a confused audience. We actually have an industry in crisis. It's dictated to by importers and retailers, and it's falling, and it has falling profits. You can all leave the room now if you want, by the way. You can go. Let's get out. Let's do something else. I would argue it's an industry that's lost control of the debate. It's being battered by the retail trade, being battered by oversupply, and increasing government regulation. Now, market forces will naturally correct some of that. Sadly, a number of producers will go out of business. The conventional view is we should shrink production to match consumption. Now, that's the conventional view. And as you can tell from the shirt, I've never been in favor of the conventional view. My argument would be, but what if we could grow the market? What if we could make it more dynamic? Now, I would argue anyone looking at the data of wine consumption would say there is enormous room for growth. Instead of looking at product contraction, we actually talk about market expansion. So how do we do that? Well, as I've said before, innovation, differentiation, quality, and access all expand markets. And here's something else to remember about differentiation too. Differentiation gives you traction, which gives you premium. We now have access to an audience that was impossible 10 years ago. Digital technology has opened up the airwaves. Anyone reading Jancis' blog, anyone watching Gary Vaynerchuk will understand that. This has meant the wine industry could be talking to a younger, more experimental audience. That's the appeal of technology. And if we're not attracting a younger audience, we're actually in decline. And it's true to say, in any market, you invest in the future. And when somebody talks to you about the grey market, forget it. You know, invest in youth, because youth is the future. Whether you like that or not, that's the way it is. Now, technology is coming to the aid of producers, allowing them a more intimate relationship with their audience. Now, I'd like to show you an example of this. This is a demonstration of a piece of up-and-coming technology from the TED conference. And if the guys could play this, here's just 5 minutes of it, and I'll talk about it. They just have to click this over. This was, I don't know if anybody knows the TED conferences, is about technology, about what is happening out there. And this is, I think this was recorded early last year. You'll see from the actual video when it comes on. It will come on, don't worry. But the other thing, I'm only going to play, oh, here we are.
I've been intrigued by this question of whether we could evolve or develop a sixth sense, a sense that would give us seamless access and easy access to meta information or information that may exist somewhere that may be relevant to help us make the right decision about whatever it is that we're coming across. And some of you may argue, well, don't today's cell phones do that already? But I would say no. When you meet someone here at TED, and this is the top networking place, of course, of the year, you don't shake somebody's hand and then say, can you hold on for a moment while I take out my phone and Google you? Or when you go to the supermarket and you're standing there in that huge aisle of different types of toilet papers, you don't take out your cell phone and open a browser and go to a website to try to decide which of these different toilet papers is the most ecologically responsible purchase to make. So we don't really have easy access to all this relevant information that can just help us make optimal decisions about what to do next and what actions to take. And so my research group at the Media Lab has been developing a series of inventions to give us access to this information in a sort of easy way without requiring that the user changes any of their behavior. And I'm here to unveil our latest effort and most successful effort so far, which is still very much a work in process. I'm actually wearing the device right now, and we've sort of cobbled it together with components that are off the shelf, and that, by the way, only cost $350 at this point in time. I'm wearing a camera, just a simple webcam, a portable battery-powered projection system with a little mirror. These components communicate to my cell phone in my pocket, which acts as the communication and computation device. And in the video here, we see my student Pranav Mistry, who's really the genius who's been implementing and designing this whole system. And we see how this system lets him walk up to any surface and start using his hands to interact with the information that is projected in front of him. The system tracks the 4 significant fingers. In this case, he's wearing simple marker caps that you may recognize. But if you want a more stylish version, you could also paint your nails in different colors. And the camera basically tracks these 4 fingers and recognizes any gestures that he's making, so he can just go to, for example, a map of Long Beach, zoom in and out, etc. The system also recognizes iconic gestures, such as the take a picture gesture, and then takes a picture of whatever is in front of you. And when he then walks back to the Media Lab, he can just go up to any wall and project all the pictures that he's taken, sort through them and organize them and resize them, etc. Again, using all natural gestures. So some of you most likely were here 2 years ago and saw the demo by Jeff Hahn, or some of you may think, well, doesn't this look like the Microsoft Surface table? And yes, you also interact using natural gestures, both hands, etc. But the difference here is that you can use any surface. You can walk up to any surface, including your hand, if nothing else is available, and interact with this projected data. The device is completely portable and can be...
Now, I think... Now, I think that the reason I wanted to play that to you is just I think it is remarkable what is going to be happening, how you're going to be able to walk up to a wine label and you are just going to be able to get information just so easily. It's just going to be absolutely incredible. Now, there is something else about technology. You know, I always love this quote, and it's the introduction of technology is always overestimated in the short term and underestimated in the long term. People always rush in and say it's going to change everything and do everything. It doesn't do quite what they thought, but in the long term has profound effect. And I've always used this quote about if after Gutenberg had invented movable type back in the middle of the 15th century, you'd ask some people at the time to predict its impact. I'm sure none of them would have said, well, it will help create the Renaissance and it will undermine the power of the Catholic Church. But it did. But I think the industry needs to do more than just rely on technology. If as I believe we should be growing the market, wine actually also needs a big idea. An idea that locks it into people's psyche as a must-have product to experience. Now, over the last 20 years or so, we've seen that happen to a number of product categories. I mean, real orange juice, or OJ as the Americans call it, became synonymous with health, with a healthy start to the day. No breakfast was complete without a glass, or so it seemed. For orange juice, a healthy start has transformed their fortunes. And coffee, as I talked about earlier, has been transformed as a product by a focus on quality and innovation. Starbucks and all the other coffee outlets around the world have transformed our appreciation of this product by the simple application of quality, innovation, and access. Coffee, one could argue, now represents sociability. Coca-Cola built itself into a global brand by being within an arm's reach of desire, it was, as it was said. It had a brilliant distribution policy, access, and it was all about refreshment. It owned refreshment. Establishing that idea with consistent marketing and communication has turned this fizzy brown sweetened liquid into a global icon. But more importantly, it elevates itself beyond refreshment to happiness. And I'll come back to that point, outselling every other soft drink in the world. A little closer to home, champagne has become a global phenomenon by associating itself with one simple human pleasure: celebration. In life, in love, and in business, champagne has built a global brand out of one region's product. Simplicity, clarity, and innovation has created for champagne a purpose in people's lives and a reason to purchase. This, I believe, is what wine needs. It is a fragmented market with a fragmented agenda. It has no simple driving force to encourage purchase apart, obviously, from its association with food. Now, I can hear all kinds of voices saying, well, how do we do this? Who's going to make this happen? How can we get agreement on a strategy to grow the market with thousands of different brands, with thousands of different agendas? Now, I can't answer all of those questions today, but other people have managed it. But it seems, I would argue, if the majority of wine is produced in Europe and consumed in Europe, it's actually the Europeans who should be driving this agenda, who should take the lead. Now, at this point, I certainly have to say, not the European Commission. Yes, if you want to say anything funny, just say European Commission. It always gets a laugh. Their ability to confuse the market is best illustrated, I would argue, by their new regulations for wine labelling. I mean, if anybody wants a masterclass in complication Just read their new guidelines. Written, I would argue here, from the producer's point of view, not the purchaser, not your audience. My fundamental belief is the industry doesn't take charge of its own agenda. It will constantly be at the mercy of market forces that dictate how it's perceived, forcing prices down and actually stifling innovation. It will be at the mercy of government regulation and the anti-alcohol lobby. We must separate ourselves out of the mainstream drinks category that is being criticised for all sorts of things, as well as binge drinking and antisocial behaviour. Wine must separate itself out. The growth in leisure, food, consumption and quality time offer wine an incredible opportunity to clarify and expand its role in our lives. Wine is a luxury with a purpose. Dramatise that purpose with a powerful communication, and I believe you'll transform growth. So, the big question is, how do we brand wine in a way which enhances its reputation, preserves the magic, and hopefully increases sales, which is the point? How do we occupy that most valuable piece of real estate, a corner of the public's mind? We have to decide what our corner is. So what should it be? Now, this is my attempt at identifying a positioning. Remember, we understand the function of wine. It's very important. We understand the function of wine. What we have to determine is what is the purpose. We go from function to purpose. What is it that lifts wine from a functional positioning to one that elevates it into a must-have, sought-after product? We understand the function of Coca-Cola is to quench thirst, is to own refreshment. But Coke, as a brand, has exploded its purchase, turned itself into an icon, but defining it as happiness. It is this simple fact. Oops, I've done something wrong there, never mind. It doesn't matter. Cola has defined itself as happiness. It seems to me wine has a very special place in our hearts. Beer is refreshment, cognac is after dinner, gin is before, and vodka is parties. Wine is obviously a companion to food. It enhances the experience. But I think there's a danger here if we just associate ourselves with food. If we do that, we're sublimating ourselves to another category. We become secondary to something else and are then at the whims and mercy of that market. Wine obviously complements the flavour of food with its own flavours. But more than that, it augments, as you can see from my chart there, the flavour of our life, our conversations, our friendship, our food. Wine, I believe, is more than just food. It flavours our life. Exploring how wine flavours food is, of course, important and ongoing. But exploring how wine and the different types of wine flavours our memories, our friendships, our conversations, how it enhances our experiences of life will, I believe, broaden its appeal and its value. Of course, we must encourage responsibility. We should be encouraging the public, I believe, to drink less but drink better. Quality enhances our lives no matter where we find it. You don't abuse friendships, so why abuse wine? Obviously, the question mark is how do we do this in such a fragmented market? Well, this now goes beyond my remit, but it seems to me you have to take control of your market if you want to shape it in the way you want, as opposed to it being shaped by authority, the EU or governments or competitors or retailers, or by your past versus your future. Now, you may disagree with this, and that's fine. This is my opinion. But unless this fragmented, confusing, mystifying product doesn't develop a communication strategy that's relevant to the 21st century, it will constantly be dictated to by market forces. And if it doesn't seek a big idea, its growth will be limited. And as I've said, despite all its presentational drawbacks, wine has been successful. I would suggest it's been successful despite the efforts of the wine market to keep pace with consumer aspirations. We must never forget that what wine makes hard to compete with is its inherent flexibility. The growth of wine has fundamentally changed how people drink. Wine's popularity across all types of occasions, from all sorts of motivations, has raised a significant challenge to other alcohol categories, which have lost their traditional role in people's drinking repertoires. From this perspective, its flexibility is a strength. What scares many of your alcohol competitors, and I know I work on some of them, is your popularity across occasions, from formal dinners to after-work socializing, but also its relevance in more passive and selfish moments, such as winding down or a chance to treat myself. This flexibility creates for wine enormous potential for growth if we engage with it. The danger in pegging it to a single occasion or motivation is that it inherently narrows the context which wine is currently thriving in. So beware the purely feud association. But with growth in drinking occasions comes the need to also avoid ubiquity, where wine can become a passive habit and lose that wonderful thing called magic. By matching wine to moods, we dramatize its magical qualities. By flavoring our life, we talk to wine's inherent advantages and enhance its value. It's always special. So, as I said and I started out, lose the mystery, emphasize the magic, and attach to wine a big, meaningful idea, an idea that drives the category even further. Stop talking about oversupply and embrace expansion. Other products have done it. It's time for wine to stand up for itself. Many thanks.
Yeah, that's better. David Banford from the Wine Society of India. So, John, can I just explore a little bit with you the concepts of wine and health? I know that this is potentially risky ground because it's to do with moderation, but there is, in my experience, a lot of opportunity for wine to differentiate itself based on it being a healthy choice compared with spirits or beer. What's your view about maximizing that opportunity?
Well, I think that I personally think that would be very dangerous to do. I think as a strategy, if I was in charge of marketing the wine industry, I would keep that at a PR level. I wouldn't engage that idea with wine's big idea, which is the one I've talked about, as I've said, whether you agree with it or not, that wine flavors our life. I think it is there is a reason for doing that. I think that it isn't talking to the magic. I think it talks to a practical thing about wine. I think products become more famous and valued more because they give you something special. The more mundane you make it, the more practical you make it, you reduce the value in that product and you reduce the premium that people are willing to pay.
Hello, Jean-Michel Valette, California. I'm curious, what have you done with your label? How do you communicate
I
for
knew
your
that
winery?
question would be coming. Well, I went against legislation, and I put wine variety on my labels. I talked about hand picking. I treated it as a label for if I was labeling a chocolate bar. I wanted to tell people what was in it, despite the fact that I was breaking AOC regulations. So I had to play that stupid game of putting the real label on the front and the official label on the back, which cost me money. So, but we will pursue it more and more. We will look at all sorts of things. We're pursuing our own organic biodynamic policy. When we can label it as such, we will do so. Trying to create differentiation is fundamentally important. So we are definitely pursuing that.
Hi, John. My name is Aigar Snorts, and I'm from Riga, from Latvia. My question was, you were talking about how it is important for any product, and for wine especially, not to be caught in the middle. And since we are in France, and you are a winemaker in France, what do you think of French wines? Which appellations are caught in the middle? Or in general, maybe which countries are caught in the middle?
Well, what I've tried to give you there was kind of, I mean, there are... I'm talking about general themes here that are going on. This is what's driving markets. Of course, there are still lots of products that are in the middle, but I would argue they are products without much of a future, and that one always invests in the future. I think that France has to seriously think about what it is going to do, where it sits in the marketplace. It should be mapping it out, and it must do it. All I would say is, just please sit down and view it from the consumer's point of view. Every time I hear somebody, mostly in France, talk about wine, they talk about it from the producer's point of view. That is fundamentally wrong. You must talk about it from the consumer's point of view. And the idea is inspire the consumer. I don't believe, I think that people will, when they understand a product, they will pay more for it. Why are people prepared to pay more for an Audi than a Volkswagen when it's made by the same company and the same factory? Because they perceive an Audi to be better than a Volkswagen. That is the reality of what a brand or branding can do for you. So I think that the French market here has to understand where it's going. What is it that consumers are looking for? And I think if they do that, then they'll begin to understand where the market should go.
Gustavo Lobianco, just a quick question. What's your main advice of sending a simple question without being simplistic?
A simple question without being simplistic. Well, I think I spend my life concentrating on the power of reduction, reducing down complicated messages to simple thoughts. And there are many people who say that that's terrible, but actually history has been driven by the soundbite. I always say that the French Revolution got it down to liberty, equality, fraternity, and yet we need about 48 words to sell a tin of cat food. The most significant revolution in the Western world got it down to those 3 words. I mean, understanding how you reduce something down, understanding how you encapsulate something is fundamentally important. It is an art. It's, I get paid large sums of money, really, so it'd be hard for me to explain it instantly here.
Josh Green from New York, over here.
Josh, over there. Yeah. Josh, hi. Oh, hi, Josh. Yeah.
You've spoken a lot about the fractiousness of the market, which is something that all of us face constantly. And we've talked during this symposium about larger producers, small producers having different agendas, certainly for the market, and branding enters that. And we see in the state market that a lot of the French regions are really trying to brand themselves some more successfully than others as they come to the States. I'm just wondering, in terms of, since we don't have in the wine market any of these leadership companies like a Coca-Cola that would create a communication strategy that would be effective for everyone, do you see any models in other industries for people coming together and developing a communication model for a lot of fractious little producers?
Well, there are lots of examples of it. Certainly in the UK, we had the Milk Marketing Board. You have the Wool Marketing Board. You had lots of examples of where markets, a fractured market comes together under one umbrella and promotes itself. I mean, Milk in the UK was very successful at doing that and had very famous campaigns. The Wool Marketing Board do that. Other organizations come together and promote themselves. I mean, I always think that the wine industry instantly thinks because it's fragmented, it can't do anything. Lots of other people are fragmented and they manage to do something. And I think we sort of accept defeat before we've even tried. And as I said, my view is I think it is the Europeans' responsibility to start this. We make and consume more wine than anybody else. In a sense, we are the brand leaders, and the brand leaders in any market take responsibility for driving that market. But there are lots of examples of it being done in other industries.
Sorry, Stephen Skelton, Master of Wine. You mentioned the last question, I'm afraid. You mentioned two industries which were both state-controlled, so the membership of the Wool Marketing Board and the Milk Marketing Board were both mandatory. The one problem with wine promotion is who pays, and that's the real issue. Who is going to pay for a sustained campaign?
Yes, we're finished. Well, we're already contributing to, via the AOC, amounts of money that are completely wasted. I always use the example of, I was telling somebody the other day, reminding them how it was about 2 years ago, the Burgundy region were running a campaign in the UK in all the colour supplements, the Observer, the Sunday Times. They were telling people that Chardonnay comes from Burgundy and Pinot Noir comes from Burgundy at a time when we were not allowed to put that on our labels. Now, that's the kind of madness that we're dealing with. They are taking vast sums of money off wine producers. Why don't they take that money, sit down and say, we're going to have a simple, single idea that drives wine? It can be, and you start with PR. It doesn't have to be a massively expensive advertising campaign, but you start speaking with one voice, and people begin to understand. Your whole promotion of the product, the category, is gathered under one thought, and people begin to understand it. Of course, I've used examples of where brands have done something, but there's no reason why we can't, with the authorities that we have that take money off us, take that money and say to them, your job is to promote wine as a category, and here's how you could do it.
Just imagine if, on your own behalves, you had been able to hire him for, what was it, an hour and a half or something. None of us could have afforded it. So this was worth your membership of the MW, your fee for entry here alone. Thank you so much for your help.